What happens when you let go? Tell you what. If I told you that the act of letting go isn't psychological surrender, it's a documented neurological event that fundamentally reorganizes how your brain processes reality, not a mindset shift or positive thinking exercise, an actual reconfiguration of neural networks that happens when you stop the exhausting work of mental control. This isn't pop psychology nonsense. This is hard neuroscience. Researchers studying stress, attachment, and cognitive control have discovered something extraordinary. Your brain expends massive energy maintaining what neuroscientists call effortful control, the constant, exhausting work of managing thoughts, suppressing emotions, controlling outcomes, and maintaining your self-image. This system operates through your prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, burning through glucose and generating stress hormones continuously. Here's what changes everything. When you genuinely let go of this control, your brain doesn't collapse into chaos. It reorganizes into a more efficient operating system. Your default mode network reconfigures. Your stress response deactivates. Your creative and intuitive networks come online. Ancient wisdom traditions discovered this mechanism through practices like surrender, acceptance, and non-attachment. Modern neuroscience has now mapped the exact brain changes that occur when you stop fighting reality and start flowing with it. I'm about to reveal 10 specific protocols that trigger this. Neurological reorganization techniques that exploit your brain's natural capacity to function better with less effort, not more. Body. The 10 Techniques. Part 1. Cognitive Control Release Protocol. Your brain dedicates enormous resources to thought suppression. Every time you try not to think about something, you actually think about it more. This is called ironic process theory, and it's exhausting your mental bandwidth. Neuroscience reveals something counterintuitive. Attempting to control your thoughts activates your anterior cingulate cortex in a perpetual monitoring loop. You're essentially running surveillance on your own mind 24/7, which depletes cognitive resources and increases anxiety. This is technique number 1 out of 10, the Cognitive Control Release Protocol. Here's your exact practice for the next 7 days. Dedicate 5 minutes twice daily to complete thought permission. Set a timer, sit comfortably, and allow absolutely any thought to arise without intervention. Don't guide thoughts toward positive topics. Don't redirect away from negative ones. When you notice yourself controlling or managing thoughts, simply no controlling and release the grip. Let your mind be completely unsupervised. The mechanism is liberating. You're training your anterior cingulate cortex to stop its exhausting monitoring function. Studies show that acceptance-based approaches reduce activity in control networks, while increasing activity in present moment awareness networks. Your brain learns it doesn't need to police itself constantly. Start practicing complete thought permission, and watch mental energy multiply as your brain stops fighting itself. Part 2. Outcome. Attachment dissolution method. You addicted to controlling outcomes you can't control. Your promotion, your relationship, your health, other people's opinions. This addiction operates through your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, your brain's value and outcome prediction system. Research on psychological flexibility shows that attachment to specific outcomes activates your brain's threat detection systems when reality doesn't match expectations. You're essentially programming yourself for perpetual disappointment by insisting reality conform to your preferences. This is technique number 2 out of 10. The Outcome Attachment Dissolution Method. Execute this protocol each evening for 21 days. Identify 3 outcomes you were attached to that day. Write them down with this exact format. I wanted X to happen. What actually happened? I released my attachment to X. Be specific. Include small outcomes like wanting someone to text back, wanting traffic to be light, wanting your coffee to taste perfect. Why this works? You're retraining your reward prediction networks. Each time you acknowledge and release an attachment, you're weakening the neural pathways that link your well-being to external outcomes. Your ventral striatum, your reward center, learns to find satisfaction in present reality rather than future fantasies. Start documenting and releasing outcome attachments nightly and watch anxiety dissolve as your happiness becomes internally sourced. Part 3. Emotional Suppression Reversal Technique. We've been taught that emotional control means suppressing unwanted feelings. Push down the anger, hide the sadness, manage the anxiety. This suppression requires constant prefrontal effort and paradoxically intensifies the emotions you're trying to eliminate. Neuroscientists studying emotion regulation have discovered that suppression activates your sympathetic nervous system, your fight-or-flight response, while simultaneously increasing activity in the very limbic regions, generating the unwanted emotion. You're essentially fighting yourself at a biological level. This is technique number 3 out of 10. The emotional suppression reversal technique. Your intervention is radical for 14 days. When any uncomfortable emotion arises, do the opposite of suppression. Amplify it deliberately for 90 seconds. If you feel anxious, let yourself feel more anxious. If you're angry, let the anger intensify. Don't act on it externally. This is an internal process. Simply remove all resistance and let the emotion reach its natural peak. The science is counterintuitive. Emotions follow an arc. They rise, peak, and naturally subside, but only when not suppressed. By removing resistance, you allow the emotion to complete its cycle. Your amygdala learns that emotions aren't dangerous, which reduces future emotional reactivity. You're essentially desensitizing your threat response. Start allowing emotional completion cycles and watch overwhelming feelings transform into manageable waves. Part 4. Identity. Flexibility integration system. You clinging to a fixed identity story that's strangling your growth. I'm an anxious person. I'm not creative. I'm bad with money. These self-concepts operate through your medial prefrontal cortex and become self-fulfilling prophecies. Research on neuroplasticity and self-concept shows that rigid identity beliefs create confirmation bias. Your brain selectively processes information that reinforces your existing self-story while filtering out contradictory evidence. You're literally limiting what you can become by who you think you are. This is technique number 4 out of 10. The Identity Flexibility Integration System. Here's your practice for 30 days. Complete this morning protocol. Write "Today I am" and list 5 identity descriptors that feel true right now. Make them specific and temporary. Today I am curious about conflict resolution. Not permanent traits like "I am a curious person" each day. Allow completely different descriptors. Give yourself permission to be multiple, contradictory, evolving. The mechanism targets your brain's self-referential processing. By framing identity as fluid and context-dependent rather than fixed and permanent, you're reducing activity in rigid self-concept networks. Your brain begins processing experience directly rather than filtering everything through a limiting self-story. Start practicing identity fluidity daily and watch yourself expand beyond the narrow character you've been playing. Part 5. Perfectionism. Deconstruction protocol. Your perfectionism isn't about high standards. It's a control mechanism rooted in fear. Every time you delay action until conditions are perfect, you're letting your amygdala, your fear center, make executive decisions. Neuroscience research on perfectionism reveals it correlates with heightened activity in error detection networks and reduced activity in reward networks. Your brain becomes hypersensitive to mistakes while desensitized to accomplishment. You're operating a neurological system designed for perpetual dissatisfaction. This is technique number 5 out of 10. The Perfectionism Deconstruction Protocol. Execute the sequence for the next 10 days. Deliberately do one thing imperfectly each day. Send the email with a typo. Submit the work at 80% rather than 95%. Have the difficult conversation before you've rehearsed it perfectly. Post the content before it's polished. Make imperfection deliberate and conscious rather than accidental and shameful. Why this works? You're conducting exposure therapy on your error detection system. Each intentional imperfection that doesn't result in catastrophe weakens the neural associations between imperfection and threat. Your anterior cingulate cortex, your error monitor, calibrates to realistic standards. You're literally reprogramming your definition of good enough. Start practicing strategic imperfection and watch paralysis dissolve as action becomes more valuable than perfection. Part 6. Temporal grasping. Release. I thought you were either replaying the past or rehearsing the future, which means you're rarely actually present. This temporal displacement operates through your hippocampus and prefrontal cortex in constant loops of memory retrieval and future simulation. Research on mind-wandering shows that your brain spends roughly 47% of waking hours in these temporal excursions, and this correlates strongly with unhappiness. When you're not here, you're essentially living in mental hallucinations of times that no longer exist or don't yet exist. This is technique number 6 out of 10. The temporal grasping release method. Your protocol is precise. Set 8 random alarms throughout your day for 16 consecutive days. When each alarm sounds, immediately ask, "Am I in the past, present or future right now. If you're not fully present, take 3 conscious breaths while deliberately releasing the temporal story. Notice one sensory detail happening right now, a sound, sensation, or visual element. The neuroscience is clear. Each interruption strengthens your meta-awareness, your capacity to notice what your mind is doing. You're also training your brain to associate the alarm cue with present moment orientation. Over time, this present orientation becomes more automatic, requiring less conscious effort. Start systematically catching temporal displacement and watch the compulsive mental time travel that drains your life force gradually cease. Part 7. Interpersonal control surrender technique. Re-exhausting yourself trying to control how others perceive you, feel about you, or behave toward you. This operates through your theory of mind networks, brain regions dedicated to modeling other people's mental states. Neuroscientists studying social cognition have found that excessive mentalizing, constantly simulating others' thoughts about you, activates your medial prefrontal cortex in anxiety-producing patterns. You're essentially running dozens of simultaneous simulations of others' judgments, which is metabolically expensive and psychologically tortuous. This is technique number 7 out of 10. The interpersonal control surrender technique. Here's your intervention for 25 days. After every social interaction, consciously practice this mantra. I release control over how a person perceives me. Their thoughts are theirs to have. Say it 3 times while taking deep breaths. When you catch yourself replaying the interaction or imagining their judgment, repeat the release. The mechanism involves deliberate inhibition of your mentalizing networks. By repeatedly redirecting attention away from modeling others' minds, you're weakening these neural pathways while strengthening self-reference processing. You're teaching your brain that your well-being doesn't require managing others' mental states. Start releasing interpersonal control after every social encounter and watch people-pleasing exhaustion transform into authentic self-expression. Part 8. Material attachment loosening system. Your relationship with possessions creates suffering through what neuroscientists call endowment effect. Once you own something, your brain overvalues it. You're not attached to the object. You're attached to your identity story about the object. Research on material attachment shows that possessions activate the same brain regions as self-concept. Your medial prefrontal cortex literally incorporates objects into your sense of self. When you lose them or fear losing them, you experience it as threat to identity. This is technique number 8 out of 10. The material attachment loosening system. Execute this practice once weekly for 12 weeks. Give away or discard one item that has meaning to you, not junk something you value. Before releasing it, spend a minute acknowledging the attachment, then consciously release it with this statement. My value doesn't depend on possessing this. I am complete without it. Donate or gift it immediately. Why this works: each intentional release recalibrates your brain's value assessment systems. Your ventromedial prefrontal cortex learns that letting go doesn't diminish you. You're also conducting exposure therapy on loss anxiety. Your amygdala discovers that releasing possessions doesn't trigger the catastrophe it predicted. Start systematically loosening material attachments and watch your sense of freedom expand as your identity contracts out of objects. Part 9. Narrative control abandonment protocol. You constantly constructing and maintaining a coherent life narrative. Who you are, where you're going, what it all means. This storytelling operates through your left hemisphere's interpreter, a system that creates meaning by connecting disparate events into causal sequences. Neuroscientists studying the interpreter phenomenon have found that your brain fabricates explanatory stories constantly, even when the actual causes are unknown or random. You're living inside a story your brain is making up in real time, then treating that fiction as objective truth. This is technique number 9 out of 10. The narrative control abandonment protocol. Your practice is this: daily for 20 days. Spend for minutes in narrative dissolution meditation. Sit quietly and notice the stories your mind tells. I'm the kind of person who this happened because my life is about. Each time a narrative emerges, know story and let it dissolve without engaging or arguing. Return to storyless awareness of present sensation. The mechanism is profound. You're training your brain to distinguish between direct experience and interpretive overlay. By repeatedly noting and releasing narratives, you're reducing automatic activation of your left hemisphere's interpreter. You're learning to exist without constant meaning making. Start practicing narrative dissolution, and watch the exhausting work of maintaining a coherent self-story become optional rather than compulsory. Part 10. Resistance pattern interruption method. Every time you say, "I don't want this," "This shouldn't be happening," or "Why is this occurring?" you're activating resistance, a neurological pattern that increases suffering without changing circumstances. This operates through your anterior cingulate cortex, detecting discrepancies between reality and preference. Research on acceptance and commitment therapy shows that psychological resistance to unchangeable situations activates stress responses while providing zero problem-solving benefit. You're essentially arguing with reality, which reality always wins. This is technique number 10 out of 10. The resistance pattern interruption method. Execute this protocol for 28 days. Notice every instance of resistance throughout your day. When you catch yourself thinking, "This shouldn't," or "I don't want," immediately pause and say internally, "This is what's happening. Can I let it be exactly as it is for the next 60 seconds? Set a mental timer. Fully accept the present reality for just 1 minute, then reassess. Why this works. You're training your brain in radical acceptance, not passive resignation, but clear-eyed acknowledgement of what is. Each practice strengthens your capacity to distinguish between controllable and uncontrollable elements. Your anterior cingulate cortex learns to conserve energy by not activating conflict responses to unchangeable realities. Start interrupting resistance patterns immediately and watch suffering decrease while your actual circumstances remain unchanged. Closing. These 10 protocols aren't separate practices, they're an integrated system for dismantling every mechanism your brain uses to maintain the exhausting illusion of control. Thought control, outcome attachment, emotional suppression, identity rigidity, perfectionism, temporal grasping, interpersonal management, material attachment, narrative construction, resistance patterns. Together, they address the complete architecture of suffering your mind creates through its desperate attempts to control an inherently uncontrollable reality. Ancient wisdom traditions call this surrender, acceptance, or non-attachment. Modern neuroscience calls it deactivating effortful control networks and allowing self-organizing processes to emerge. Science has proven what mystics knew. Letting go isn't weakness. It's the most sophisticated form of strength, the capacity to stop fighting reality and start dancing with it. Your brain functions better. Your stress decreases, your creativity increases, and your well-being becomes internally generated rather than externally dependent. Your transformation doesn't start tomorrow or next week. It starts the moment you release your grip on just one thing you've been desperately trying to control. One thought, one outcome, one identity story, one relationship, one possession, the version of you that flows rather than forces, that accepts rather than resists, that trusts rather than controls. That version isn't someone you need to become. It's who you naturally are when you stop the exhausting work of being someone else. Let go. Right now. Not eventually. Now. Watch what happens. Your liberated self is waiting. Stop postponing the meeting.